Two officers dragged a quiet black man into court, laughed at his name, and mocked his silence until he placed an FBI badge on the bench and turned the entire courtroom upside down. The bailiff barely looked up when the clerk called out Leonard Briggs. A low ripple of voices moved through the room, but nobody stood until a tall, clean-cut black man in a slightly rumpled dark suit rose from the back row and walked steadily down the aisle. No attorney at his side, no stack of files, no one trailing behind him, just him. From the rear, two uniformed officers leaned closer. "That him?" one muttered. "Has to be. Look at the way he's walking." Probably another one of those pseudo-legal types who claim the Constitution doesn't apply. The second officer smirked. "Heard that nonsense a dozen times." They chuckled loud enough that a few heads turned. Leonard didn't react. His expression stayed flat, unreadable, as if the scene was something he'd lived through before. The judge, a pale-skinned man with thinning gray hair and a voice like an old radio announcer, slid his glasses higher on his nose and peered at the folder in front of him. "Mr. Briggs," he said, turning a page, "this charge stems from refusing orders during a lawful traffic stop." "That's what's written," Leonard replied calmly, "and you don't have counsel here. I don't require one." More laughter drifted from the back. The judge glanced at the officers but chose not to intervene. The air in the courtroom thickened, not explosive, but tight enough that everyone noticed. "This looks like a minor infraction," the judge said at last. "Shouldn't take long. Mr. Briggs, do you have anything to say?" Leonard stepped forward, slowly sliding a hand into his jacket. One of the officers shifted, fingers brushing the grip of his weapon. Leonard paused, then withdrew a slim laminated badge and set it neatly on the judge's bench. "I'm Leonard D. Briggs," his tone steady and measured. "Director of Internal Affairs, Federal Bureau of Investigation." Silence fell like a curtain. The judge stared at the badge, mouth parting before snapping shut again. The officer who had risen halfway dropped back into his seat, stunned. His partner's eyes widened as though he'd seen a ghost. "Your FBI?" the judge asked. Leonard didn't blink. "Internal Affairs," he clarified. "I review misconduct cases across the Southeastern Division, especially in departments that conveniently shut off body cameras." A cough, a shuffle of shoes, a paper falling somewhere in the gallery. The quiet was absolute. The judge cleared his throat, leaning slowly back. "Would you join me in chambers, Mr. Briggs?" Leonard shook his head once. "Everything stays on record." "Transparency." One officer finally stood, stammering. "We didn't know who he was." Leonard looked at them, not hostile, just observant. "You never asked," he replied. But silence in court doesn't last long. Outside those walls, word spread like wildfire, and this time it was aimed higher than anyone expected. Just past 9:45 that night, Leonard exited Highway 47 outside Biloxi, Mississippi. He'd been driving since dawn, inspecting small agencies along the Gulf, flagged for irregular arrest logs, questionable force reports, and a suspicious pattern of disabled cameras. His rental car was a modest gray Nissan Altima, nothing eye-catching, deliberately plain. Leonard never announced his role. He preferred to see things without filters. That evening, he was headed toward a roadside inn on Bayou Vista Drive when red and blue lights flared in his mirror. With a tired sigh, he eased onto the shoulder. Two white officers stepped out, both mid-30s, one bald, flashlight already snapping on as they approached. They didn't move in right away. The bald officer rapped sharply on the driver's side glass, impatience dripping from his tone. "License and registration." Leonard lowered the window halfway. "What's the basis for the stop, officer?" "License, registration." The demand came again, harder this time. "You skipped a signal on that last lane merge." Leonard glanced at the dash reflection in his mirror. "I'm fairly certain I used it. Got something to hide?" The second cop asked, now leaning on the passenger side frame. "Nothing to hide," Leonard replied evenly, "just trying to understand if this is traffic enforcement or something else." That didn't sit well. The bald one bent closer. "You trying to get smart with me? Step out of the vehicle." "I've complied with every request," Leonard said quietly. "I just asked for clarity. Step out now." Leonard didn't move. He handed over his license instead. Leonard Briggs. No hint of FBI, just an Alabama driver's license. Clean, ordinary, nothing out of place. Still, suspicion lingered. Were you heading? The officer pushed. Classified. You can't say or you won't. Leonard met his eyes. Federal protocol. That short reply snapped the cop's temper. Federal protocol? What's that supposed to mean? You think you're untouchable? Leonard gave no answer. The second officer tugged open the passenger door. Outside. Now Leonard's voice dropped low. This stop has crossed the line into unlawful, but they weren't interested. Rough hands dragged him out, twisting his arm, pressing his face against gravel while knees dug into his back. He didn't fight, didn't shout. One officer barked curses, the other radioed in that he was resisting. Leonard's cheek pressed against the road, his ears memorizing every word. In his jacket pocket, a tiny recorder he'd clicked on at the first flash of lights captured it all. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. A habit born of knowing how these encounters too often end for men like him in the Deep South. By the time they booked him into the county station, the paperwork painted him as belligerent and uncooperative, conveniently omitting their own provocation, conveniently missing any mention of unnecessary force. No body cam files existed either, at least not in the official record. When Leonard asked for the arresting officer's badge number, he was met with a sneer. Don't worry, you'll get plenty of time to talk in front of the judge. They locked him in a holding cell overnight. No phone call, no supervisor, just humming fluorescents, peeling paint, and the smug grin of the cop who thought the night had ended in his favor. But it hadn't, not even close. Because the real reckoning wasn't in that cell, it was waiting in open court. When Leonard laid his FBI badge on the judge's bench, the silence didn't just hover, it crushed the room flat. Those mocking grins from the back row evaporated. The shaved head officer froze, his stare flicking between the man he'd manhandled and the insignia on that badge. The judge cleared his throat, but the wobble in his voice betrayed him. Mr. Briggs, are you asserting you work for the FBI? Leonard's expression never shifted. Not asserting, stating. He nudged the badge forward with a single finger. You can confirm the number with Director Travis McCall's office or through the Inspector General in Washington. A veteran clerk, Darlene, known for her sharp instincts after 3 decades in courtrooms, rose hesitantly. Your Honor, shall I verify? Please, the judge answered, faster than he meant to. Leonard stepped aside, calm, unhurried. Every pair of eyes followed him. Even a restless toddler in the gallery froze, sensing the shift. The officer who had slammed Leonard into the pavement whispered harshly, no way this guy's for real. His partner leaned in, voice lower. That badge looked authentic. That ID too. If it's legit, we're finished. Leonard heard them, but offered nothing back. Gaze locked on the bench, where the judge seemed to shrink into his robe. When the clerk returned minutes later, a notepad clutched tightly in her hand, she didn't even look at the officers. Confirmed, she said plainly, FBI, Internal Affairs, Southeastern Division, 25 years in service, senior ranking position. The quiet that followed wasn't fueled by mockery anymore. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of humiliation. From the flicker in the judge's eyes, from the shallow breaths of the officers, from the prosecutor suddenly stripped of arguments, Leonard finally broke the silence. I didn't come here to put on a show, he said evenly. I didn't even intend to file a complaint. I was on duty, quietly, reviewing departments flagged under active scrutiny. I kept my ID tucked away because I wasn't obligated to present it. I offered my license. I stayed calm. I followed the law. His tone never rose, yet it carried across the chamber like a weight. I was shoved to the ground, cuffed, and locked away for hours without justification. My rights were dismissed, but every second was recorded, every protocol breach noted. The judge sank back in his chair, fingers laced tight. Mr. Briggs, I'm not here for your regret, Leonard cut in. I'm here to demand the charges be dismissed immediately and that both arresting officers be placed on paid leave until federal review concludes. The prosecutor began to speak, but the judge raised his hand. So ordered. The 2 officers stared, stunned. Suspension, just like that. The bald one blurted, his voice cracking. The judge gave no reply. Leonard turned, meeting their eyes. This was never just about me, he said. It's about every man and woman you decided didn't count, about citizens without a badge to flash. I had one, and still wound up with my face in the gravel. One officer tried to step forward, voice shaky. We didn't know who you were if we had. Leonard lifted his hand, cutting him off. That's exactly the issue, but the badge was only the surface. The truth still sat buried under doctored reports, missing files, and body cams that somehow failed at the same time. When the session adjourned, the gallery scattered like they'd been exposed to radiation. The officers froze at the exit, pale, motionless, realizing their careers had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. Outside, Mississippi's thick morning air clung to Leonard's shoulders as he walked steadily to his car. In the driver's seat, he let out a long breath. Not relief, not victory, just the heaviness that came with proof of yet another system cracked. At the nearby sheriff's office, Ricky Halbin sat behind his cluttered desk when the call landed. FBI, he muttered, pressing the phone between ear and shoulder. You're telling me that guy was FBI? His deputy, Tamara Wells, leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, face unreadable. She'd skimmed the arrest notes, and they hadn't smelled right from the start. Yes, sir, came the confirmation. Leonard Briggs, Internal Affairs. Ricky pressed his palm to his forehead. You're saying 2 of my men cuffed a federal agent and hauled him into court without even confirming who he was? Yes, sir. He dropped the receiver onto the desk with a thud and looked at Tamara. Why didn't anybody tell me? Her voice was flat. Maybe because they didn't treat him like somebody worth telling. Back in the courthouse, the judge convened a hushed meeting in chambers. No transcripts, no microphones, just red faces, low voices, and the gnawing fear of a headline they couldn't control. Leonard, meanwhile, had returned to the motel. Laptop open, secure line buzzing, he leaned back against the thin mattress. The voice on the other end was steady. You intact? I'm fine, Leonard said, but they're not. What happened? He laid it out, the stop, the force, the vanished footage, the night in a cell without rights. The voice exhaled slowly. First time this department's been flagged. Number 3, prior complaints in less than 2 years, all dismissed. One complainant even left the state. Then let's move forward, make the investigation formal. Leonard gave a small nod, even though the man on the other end of the line couldn't see it. You want this contained? Not anymore. That afternoon, Officer Curtis Dell, the bald one, tried to patch the wreckage. He walked into the station feigning calm, but the stiffness in his stride and the way he avoided Tamara's stare betrayed him. He tapped lightly on the sheriff's office door. Got a second? Ricky didn't glance up from his desk. Say it quick. Look, I had no idea who he was. If I'd known, I don't care if he was hauling trash or walking out of a grave. Ricky cut in. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, didn't so much as twitch without giving you a fair chance. And you still hauled him in like a street punk. Curtis stepped closer. I froze. He started with talk about federal protocols. We've seen plenty of frauds flash fake badges. Ricky's eyes narrowed. And when he gave you a valid state license, you tossed it aside. Curtis had no answer. Ricky leaned forward across the desk. Do you realize what happens if DOJ dispatches investigators here? Curtis stared at the floor. I screwed up. Tamara, who had stepped in during the exchange, folded her arms tight. This wasn't just a screw-up. You shoved every one of us under a federal spotlight. Maybe that's exactly where we belong. Curtis' head snapped toward her. You can't mean that. Her voice stayed firm. I'm tired of reports that don't match the footage. I'm tired of people leaving here more broken than when they came in. Ricky stayed silent, jaw clenched, phone heavy in his hand, already calculating what skeletons were about to tumble out. And yet none of them realized Leonard was at a cheap motel desk with his laptop open, staring down a file thicker than the one they imagined. A chain of names, dates, and misconduct stretched across years. His fingers moved methodically, not hurried, not emotional. Emotion muddied the work, and Leonard never let it. He was crafting a timeline, another piece in a puzzle he had solved far too often. He logged into the department's portal and filed a precise request. The body cam recordings from the night he'd been stopped. Time-stamped, formal, unimpeachable. The reply hit his inbox in less than an hour. We regret to inform you the body cam files from May 12th are unavailable due to technical malfunction. We are currently reviewing system logs. Leonard leaned back, exhaling through his nose. Not surprise, only confirmation. Another entry for a file that thickened with each passing minute. He dialed the DOJ Regional Evidence Desk and asked for a scan of the department's software logs. Within minutes, the analyst's voice came flat through the line. They've had half a dozen outages over the last year, every single one during stops involving Black or Latino drivers. Not one during drills, not one during minor traffic stops with white motorists. Leonard kept typing, adding another row to the record. Inside the department, Dell sat at his desk, eyes glazed over at the blank screen, haunted by the thought of what was unraveling. Across the hall, Tamara scrolled through forgotten archives, opening reports nobody wanted touched. One from late autumn. A teenager stopped near his block, filed a complaint about being roughed up. Footage, missing, another case. Same story, another again. Her lips tightened. They really thought this would stay invisible, she muttered. At the back office, Brian, the quiet IT technician who rarely spoke above a whisper, felt his screen blink with a message on the internal chat system. A message that would shift more than just the files. Check the system logs for May 12th. Briggs incident. Who touched the files before they vanished? Brian hesitated. He hated dipping into this kind of fire, but the itch to know was stronger than his nerves. Fingers flew over the keyboard, a trace ran, and the result appeared almost immediately. Not once, twice. Hours after the arrest, then again early the next morning. Manual deletions bypassed safeguards. Brian stared at the evidence, then quietly printed the sheet and sealed it inside an envelope. No email, no trail. He walked it across the room and set it on Tamara's desk. She opened it, jaw hardening. "Thanks," she muttered. Brian just turned away without a sound. The next morning, Leonard walked through the front doors of the department. Same worn suit, a thin manila folder in hand. The desk officer froze like he'd just seen a storm step inside. "Agent Briggs, we weren't expecting you." Leonard's voice stayed level. "I'm not here to stir trouble. I'm here to confirm what I already know." He moved past without waiting for permission. Hallways cleared around him like water parting. He knocked once, entered the sheriff's office. Ricky looked up, face lined, eyes tired. "You got our notice." Leonard placed the folder on the desk. "I also got the access trail." Ricky didn't reach for it. "Someone scrubbed the footage," Leonard said, "after the arrest, before court. Care to guess who?" Ricky dragged a hand over his face. "We're reviewing." "Number," Leonard interrupted. "I am." He turned to go, then paused at the doorway. "Have Officer Dell's badge and sidearm ready before sunset. Internal Affairs will arrive this week." Ricky didn't argue. He didn't lift his head. And Leonard knew Dell wasn't the only one whose fingerprints were smudged across this mess. By midweek, 2 dark SUVs rolled quietly into the back lot of Jefferson County PD. No sirens, no flashing lights, just presence. Leonard stepped out first, flanked by 2 agents flown in from D.C., Grace Mendoza, compliance strategist, eyes sharp as glass, and Nathan Cole, a forensic specialist whose silence spoke louder than words. They weren't there to posture, they were there to dig. Inside, the air had shifted. Officers who once cracked jokes now hunched behind screens. Ricky looked hollow, days without real sleep etched on his face. Only Leonard's team spoke clearly, giving directions like clockwork. Grace swept into records, demanding disciplinary files, stop reports, performance reviews, IA notes, anything written, anything traceable. Nathan vanished into the server room with Brian, who handed over full access without resistance. Leonard sat in a cramped back office across from Tamara, who had a laptop lit up with layered reports. Her focus was razor sharp. "These all blur together," she said, scrolling. Stops labeled aggressive, cameras off, vague language, no follow-through. Leonard's head dipped slowly. This isn't one mistake. It's culture. What's ignored, what's covered, what becomes routine. Tamara spun her screen toward him. April last year. Man pulled over after his shift. No citation, no arrest, just forced out of the car. Report says non-compliant. Leonard scanned it. Same phrasing, same pattern, over and over again. Down the corridor, Grace pushed into Ricky's office without ceremony. I need every document you've got on officer training, use of force guidelines, escalation procedures, and camera operation protocols. Ricky looked like he might push back, but instead he just gestured to a cabinet. Bottom drawers. Grace pulled them open, flipped through, and shook her head. These manuals are 4 years behind current standards. Ricky stayed silent, his jaw tight. In the server room, Nathan worked with precision. Drives were mirrored, logs pulled, deleted footage rebuilt from backup caches the officers hadn't even realized was still online. 2 files flagged incomplete. One carried audio. He clipped it, handed Leonard the headphones. Leonard listened, crackling voices through static. Where you headed? Can't say. You can't or you won't. Federal protocol. You think you're above the law. The slam of a door, gravel crunch, a body hitting ground. Leonard removed the headphones. This is enough. He walked into Ricky's office where Grace still sifted through faded binders. We're issuing a compliance hold, Leonard said flatly. No officer here participates in field patrols until this review is closed. Ricky leaned forward, voice nearly a whisper. You're freezing our department? Temporarily, Leonard replied. Dispatch stays active, emergencies only. But as of this moment, your operations are under federal supervision. Ricky exhaled sharply. Do you know what kind of blow this will be? Leonard's eyes stayed steady. Do you know what not doing it already cost? He shut the door behind him. On the stairwell, officers turned their faces away, even those who'd never laid eyes on him before. At the base, Tamara intercepted him. I pulled complaint logs, she said, lifting a stack of pages. Every denial follows a pattern, reports marked unfounded. No interviews, no follow-up. Leonard's brow lifted. Who authorized? She handed him the list. Curtis Dell's name filled the page again and again. Leonard folded it once, slipped it into his coat. Good work, he told her. Tamara blinked at the words. You think it'll matter? Leonard paused at the exit. That depends. Change, he knew, never rode on paperwork alone. It depended on whether the town was ready to face what had been buried. By week's end, they wouldn't have a choice. Friday morning, whispers had broken into headlines. Local channels first, short segments, careful speculation. FBI official detained during questionable stop. Then came the audio. The clipped patrol car mic, grainy but undeniable, and the phrase that now carried weight far beyond one courtroom. Federal protocol. The words echoed through diners, barber shops, living rooms, pews. They weren't just a defense anymore. They were an accusation. At Oakland Cafe, old men leaned over chipped mugs, voices low. They pulled him for nothing, treated him like he was nobody. He showed ID clean, and even if he hadn't, that's not how you treat people. Across town, in the community center on Jefferson Avenue, parents gathered after school. They were weary of instructing their kids how to keep their hands visible, how to answer yes sir, no sir, and knowing it might not save them. By dusk, a town hall convened, hastily announced, yet overflowing. Some were furious, some afraid, most simply desperate for clarity. At the podium, Mayor Harold Lanning, an aging man with shaky hands, faced the crowd. We are aware of the investigation. We are working with federal agents and changes will come. A voice cut him off from the back. Felicia Green, whose son had filed a complaint 2 years ago that died in silence, stood tall. You reopening the old cases? She demanded. Harold swallowed. We're reviewing that, she shot back. Don't promise, act. Applause rippled, hesitant at first but growing. Leonard stood near the rear wall, arms folded, watching. He hadn't come to speak, he'd come to hear. Tamara slipped in midway and stopped beside him. Didn't think this many would turn out, she murmured. They always do, Leonard replied softly, once they stopped being afraid of silence. Voices filled the room one after another. A teenager recounted being stopped while walking home from football practice. A single mother described being pulled over twice in 1 week, asked if her car was stolen. An elderly man told a story buried since 1988, handcuffed on a back road and released without a word. None of these moments had reached headlines before, but tonight every ear listened. Then, to everyone's surprise, Sheriff Ricky stepped to the microphone. The crowd hushed instantly. He looked worn, stripped of armor. I've worn this badge for 31 years, he said slowly, and I'd be lying if I claimed I hadn't let some of you down. His eyes flicked to Leonard. We didn't know Mr. Briggs was federal, but that's not the real issue. The issue is we didn't care enough about who any of you were. That's on me. Murmurs spread, some skeptical, some softened. We're reopening the closed complaints, he continued, with federal oversight. Anyone found part of this pattern will be held accountable, even me. A woman near the front called out. Words are cheap. Ricky nodded once. Then hold me to them. Leonard stayed silent, but Tamara tilted her head toward him. You buy it? Leonard's reply was quiet. I believe the room. Outside afterward, clusters lingered on the steps, voices low but determined. It wasn't resolved, not even close. But something fractured open, and once exposed, it wouldn't close again. Accountability required consequence, and Leonard knew one last meeting had to seal that truth. Monday morning, he climbed the steps of City Hall, a file in one hand, a coffee in the other. Inside the mayor's chamber, the session was meant to be closed door, but two others waited. Tamara Wells, officially named liaison for federal oversight, and Grace Mendoza with her own thick folder. Mayor Harold Lanning looked up, smiled tight, didn't expect an audience. Leonard didn't return it. He placed the folder flat on the table. Preliminary findings, he said. 5 verified breaches of policy, 3 falsified reports, 2 tampered cameras, and 1 clear obstruction of a federal investigation. Lanning's knuckles whitened against the wood. Are you pushing for prosecution? Leonard paused, glanced at Grace. She gave a small nod. We're recommending a full personnel audit, Grace said firmly. Effective now, and the removal of Officer Curtis Dell. Lanning inhaled hard. You're telling me to fire one of our most senior men? Leonard's gaze stayed fixed. We are telling you to restore trust in a system your community no longer believes in. Tamara leaned forward. You can protect a man who buried evidence, or you can stand with the people who demanded change 3 nights ago. Lanning's eyes dropped to the desk. For once, no press release, no half measure could blunt the truth. He finally nodded. The termination order goes out today. Leonard closed his folder and rose. We'll be monitoring compliance. Any delay gets escalated straight to Washington. The meeting broke quietly, but its weight trailed Leonard into the daylight. He didn't head for the car immediately. Instead, he cut through the square, where people milled about, buying bread, chatting on benches, trying to pretend normalcy. At one corner, a small group of students leaned against a railing. One boy in a blue hoodie caught Leonard's eye and gave him a simple nod. Just a nod, but different than the ones he'd seen before. This time the nod carried something different, recognition, respect without fear. Leonard returned it and kept walking. Back at the department, Officer Dell was summoned to Ricky's office. No explanations, no bargaining. Just a termination letter stamped with the mayor's signature. Effective immediately. Dell didn't shout, didn't plead. He stared at the page, then at Ricky. So that's it? Ricky's eyes lifted. You think it shouldn't be? Dell's voice faltered. I acted the way I thought I should. Ricky leaned forward. You didn't realize we didn't care. That's what cost you everything. Dell left through the back exit, and no one saw him again that day. Tamara stood in the hallway, watching the shift ripple through the building. Some faces looked relieved, others hardened with resentment. But change was moving in, steady and irreversible. That evening, Leonard returned to close the loop. One last meeting with the mayor, the sheriff, and DOJ officials to begin drafting new standards, mandatory reviews, body cam audits, community reporting systems. No applause, no ceremony, just the start of actual reform. As dusk spread across the rooftops, Leonard made a final call. His voice was calm but worn. Send me the next location. A pause lingered on the line. Already, Leonard answered. But before he packed his bag, he sat quietly, reflecting. Not about the rank on his badge, not about headlines or authority, about how quickly respect disappears when people confuse it with fear. True respect, he knew, wasn't about what you wore, what you drove, or who followed you. It was about the choices you made when no one was watching, about who you were when the world assumed the worst. The lesson wasn't in the noise, it was in the silence that followed, in the way laughter dies when someone refuses to bend, in the pause of a town forced to admit things were never fine. Leonard didn't chase speeches or spotlights. What mattered was what people did when they thought no one would hold them accountable. At the motel, he sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, phone buzzing with updates from DC. He muted it not out of defiance, but because he needed one breath, one moment to remember why this still mattered after decades. Not for his own justice, for those who never had a badge to pull out. For the teenager ordered to empty his backpack after practice. For the mother watching her toddler cry in the back seat at a midnight traffic stop. For the old man who never told anyone that in 1988, 2 officers pinned him to the hood of his car for rolling a stop sign. They didn't get to say they worked for the FBI. They didn't have a recorder in their pocket. They just went home, or they didn't. What Leonard had done in that courtroom wasn't about power. It was about using it with precision, without ego, without rage, but with purpose. Because respect isn't loud, and it isn't granted by titles. It's earned in the way you see someone's humanity before you measure their worth. They laughed when Leonard walked into that courtroom because of what they assumed about him. But that day didn't define him. It defined them. And the investigation that followed wasn't just a process. It was a mirror held up to the department, the town, the system itself. Broken things don't heal by pretending they're whole. They heal when ignored voices are heard, when accountability is enforced, when another name is no longer lost inside a file stamped unfounded. So if you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, overlooked, remember this. Silence is not weakness. Calm is not surrender. Sometimes the quietest figure in the room carries the most weight. And when the moment comes to speak, for yourself or for someone who cannot, the badge doesn't define the person. The action does. Leonard Briggs wasn't a hero. He didn't need to be. He just needed to do his job and do it honestly. And maybe, in a world where real respect is so easily forgotten, sometimes that's enough. If this story struck a chord with you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Question it. Demand more from the places and people meant to protect you. And if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe. Because stories like this, reminders of what justice should look like, aren't just tales, they're reflections. And we need to keep telling them.